The sun set on a July evening in Los Angeles. At the Man Bruin Theater, Ming-Na, Donald Sutherland, and James Woods gathered to open one of the most ambitious film projects ever conceived. Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within promised the future. Completely animated in cutting-edge computer graphics, the movie anchored a plan by Square to blur the lines between films and video games. The legendary developers of the Final Fantasy series believed so much in this new age of CG that they opened an animation studio, Square Pictures, in Hawaii. First, they would make The Spirits Within, then use that experience and technology to create not only films, but cinematic video game experiences. Yet things did not go as planned. The Spirits Within not just flopped, it crashed in spectacular fashion. The film lost Square nearly $100 million. Square Pictures closed down with no other title to its name. Hironobu Sakaguchi, father of the Final Fantasy series and the film's director, resigned from his role as company vice president months before the film would debut, in part to take responsibility for the picture's massive budget and its impact on Square's profits. He gradually withdrew from the company, leaving a couple years later to form his own development studio. The massive financial loss forced Hisashi Suzuki, president and CEO of Square, to visit Sony hat in hand. The PlayStation brand owed much to Square and its console-exclusive titles. Sony purchased nearly 19% of the company, an investment of almost $124 million, making up for the losses incurred by The Spirits Within. Suzuki resigned towards the end of 2001 to be replaced by Yoichi Wada. Internet commenters often cite this time of Square's troubles as the reason it merged with Enix in the year 2003. Additionally, that merger is seen as the source of all the company's woes and stagnating creative output in the decade to follow. Yet the merger itself is a matter shrouded in complications. Combining the two companies had been talked about at least since the year 2000, with no definitive results. Square's financial setbacks actually hindered the talks, as Enix second-guessed the idea of merging with a company hemorrhaging money. So, why did Square and Enix merge? The simple answer? To make more money, but obviously it's a lot more complicated than that. By the new millennium, Square was a global phenomenon. Ever since the days of the Famicom and the Nintendo Entertainment System, Square achieved worldwide prominence as a developer of first-class role-playing games. Its impressive stable of hugely successful franchises spanned multiple console generations. Yet Square faced a growing problem that it finally had to confront with the delay of Final Fantasy X and the catastrophe that was The Spirits Within. Game budgets were rapidly growing, not the least because of new console technologies and the marketing budgets that helped make their games blockbuster hits. A single failure like The Spirits Within, or an extended delay like what happened with Final Fantasy X, could jeopardize the company. Although it achieved huge success both in and out of Japan, Square was still not as big as the company sitting on the other side of the table. In the early 2000s, Enix sat in an enviable position. The popularity of Dragon Quest in Japan, especially in the 80s and 90s, is difficult to overstate. Outside of the country, a legend developed. One iteration stated that, by law, a Dragon Quest game had to come out on a national holiday or weekend, otherwise nobody would show up to work. Yet Dragon Quest never caught on in the global market. There was a passionate, minor international fan base to be sure, but it was insignificant to the Japanese domestic market. For most of the 1990s, Dragon Warrior, as it was known via localization, wasn't released in North America. In 1995, Enix's American offices closed, though they would reopen 4 years later. In Japan, Enix had huge piles of cash but grim global prospects if left on its own. It also didn't have direct control over its properties. It was merely a publisher, with most development handled by other companies. If Enix wanted to survive in an increasingly global and franchise-dependent marketplace, things would have to change. For the merger to happen, Square had to turn itself around after the first financial losses in the company's history. The releases of Final Fantasy X and Kingdom Hearts, along with Sony's cash infusion, revitalized the company. Square didn't outright need Enix at this point, it never did, but the executives at both companies could sense the shifting winds of the games industry. Global growth was an absolute necessity if either company was going to survive. In 2002, Japan accounted for 50% of the video game market. The PS2 achieved a rapid international success, and the Xbox embodied America's prominence in the console space. Square and its franchises were best positioned to harness gaming's globalization. Next, the exponentially increasing development budgets of Square's biggest franchises required greater amounts of investment. Enix could provide the cash, and its almost guaranteed domestic franchise hits could insulate the company from a miscalculated risk or extended development cycle. More controversially, the upper management of both companies sought to build an entertainment company of enormous size and scope. Once merged, the new company could rival Capcom and one day grow to Konami levels of assets. Together, Square and Enix could grow beyond RPGs and become a publishing and developing titan. These desires and the fallout of the merger are often centered on one man, Yoichi Wada. He succeeded Hisashi Suzuki as the head of Square and became president of the combined Square Enix. According to Final Fantasy composer Nobuo Uematsu, Wada chose the Square Enix headquarters based on the prophecies of a fortune teller. Wada's 10-year reign over Square Enix, ending in 2013, saw the company stumble to meet the new challenges of the HD era. Final Fantasies 12, 13, and 15 experienced long, multi-year delays. Final Fantasy 14 had to be completely rebuilt, all at great financial cost. Even with the newfound international marketing power of Square, Enix properties failed to make it big outside of Japan. Harkening back to Enix's poor international fortune in the 1990s, Dragon Quest X would never release outside of Japan. To realize the goal of becoming a multi-genre international development powerhouse, Square Enix purchased the faltering Eidos in 2009. Eidos' output provided the hits Square Enix needed, while Final Fantasies languished in development and Dragon Quest failed to grow internationally. But even Eidos' big releases could not count as successes because millions of sales did not equate to significant profit. Consequently, Square Enix's stock price stagnated throughout the 2000s. The company suffered from EA syndrome, a massive entity unable to adequately respond to the rapidly changing gaming environment and under perpetual scrutiny by its critics and consumers. The merger should have worked. At the time, the deal made sense. All big-budget game developers faced growing costs, and a bigger company with more money should have been able to handle those strains. The transition to HD consoles killed off many mid-tier Japanese developers, and there's no guarantee that Square could have survived the era on its own. Meanwhile, Square's international presence should have given Enix properties a chance to grow. Square Enix became a company big enough to survive, but not dynamic enough to succeed. For many people playing video games today, the merger happened so long ago that some aren't even cognizant that Square and Enix used to be two distinct companies. There was once a time when the makers of Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy competed with each other. We feel the effects of their merger to this very day. Thanks for watching, and mahalo.